Hi, welcome to this episode of Faculty Matters, a podcast sponsored by the Seton Hall University Center for Faculty Development. I'm your host, Mary Balkun, Professor of English and Director of Faculty Development here at the university. This bi-weekly series features conversations with experts from both within the university and beyond its walls who can speak to issues related to teaching and pedagogy, research and scholarship, and work-life balance. So my guest for this episode today is a special friend. This is So You Want to Start a Podcast. And this is Andrew Rimby. So Andrew is an adjunct professor here at the English department at Seton Hall. He teaches at a few other places as well. And I can honestly say that I trace my interest in starting this podcast directly to him. We chatted about this at the MLA convention back in January of 24. We were both presenting. And Andrew is the host and director of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And I'm going to let him explain what that is. So thank you so much for joining me today, Andrew, especially given the crazy time of the semester. I don't know when you're listening to this, but this is now April 23rd. We see 2 weeks left until we get to the end of the spring term. And if you've been in academia for any amount of time, you know that pretty much all hell is breaking loose right now. It's just going to get worse.
Well, they say, right, if you want to get a task done, to ask the busiest people. And I always believe that.
Yes.
You can always rely on them. So I attribute, Mary is such a mentor, and you've been so wonderful with my journey, both before I was here at Seton Hall, when I finished my PhD at Stony Brook.
Right.
And I'm so glad to now call you a colleague. So
yes,
thank you for inviting me. But yeah, so the Ivory Tower Boiler Room started, I'll give the elevator pitch, in August 2020 during the pandemic. As we all were so virtual and isolated, I just felt there needed to be a space for academic community. So it started first as, I'm a PhD student. How do I navigate this? Where's the community? Talking to fellow academics. And then, now it's almost 5 years going strong. And I've had New York Times bestsellers on, and it just reached a level of mass culture where I've been so lucky to have Broadway performers, and I do a monthly book club that's free. We're actually reading the Let Them theory. So anyone out there, if they're listening to this, we're meeting on May 4th at 5 p.m. And, they can always email me at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com to join the book club. But what's so nice is I feel that my podcast and arts and culture one, it's ranged in conversations that I've been inspired to teaching: the Broadway musical, 19th century literature, which I know we share an affinity towards, also movie culture. So I've gotten to collaborate with a lot of fellow podcasters outside of academia. So I always say the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, literally in the name, is a fantasy of highbrow culture and the underbelly of the beast of the creative boiler room process. So it's like lowbrow meets highbrow. And it truly is a pop culture academic podcast. And, I've gotten to consult podcasters. I've helped them with their social media. So I've had interns from Stony Brook, and I've just had a conversation with a SUNY college who's looking for interns to help on the podcast. So I love that I get to open up those ivory tower walls with my passion for pedagogy, but also getting to talk to the public. And I really do feel like my mission is how, as a trained literary academic, can I distill a message to the public about the importance of the arts?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, you are certainly ahead of me and many of my colleagues in thinking about sort of the frontward facing aspect of academia, right? Especially, frankly, the humanities, because, there have been so many attacks on and struggles with the humanities in recent years. That there should be a public humanities, that people need to understand what we're doing and why we do it. I mean, why would I spend, years of my life writing this book? And it's so funny. Somebody actually said to me recently, a member of my family, so how many people do you think have actually read that book? Well, or bought it for that matter? Well, individual people might not necessarily buy books like ours these days. First of all, they tend to be quite expensive, but libraries do buy them. And then nowadays, publishers have gotten really savvy and they'll actually parse it out chapter by chapter so you can buy an individual chapter. Anyway, so this is all a different aspect of academia, but you're right, getting out there what we do. Had you always been interested in podcasts? I mean, or was this just? I mean, how did you move down that road?
I really didn't know about podcasts, interestingly, until the pandemic. It was actually because I so missed the community of humanities at the university that I started to look at Spotify, and I realized, wow, there's so many genres here. But there's really no academic genre. So that's really what was the ignition was, it looks like there's a niche that can be filled, which is academics haven't really jumped on board of the podcast space. And I had always, though, been interested in the beauty of gabbing and I won't say gossiping, but definitely chatting. And I always loved, I have a theater background in musical theater, so I always was performing. And I really feel like podcasting is an excellent improv talent that if you can really be on the spot and you ask probing, investigative questions, that's what the public wants. Like they want to feel that they're with you having coffee or they're with you just chatting about whatever's going on in your day. So yeah, the gift of gab was in my life, but I do have to say, I think it's from my classroom experience of using audio video. So this is before Canvas had the amazing studio options with now we can record right from our Canvas site and have students record. I had to use VoiceThread and I would record a video of myself giving a prompt because I had taught an online class before the pandemic. So I would give them, it was a film studies course, say Sunset Boulevard. I would give them why is Norma Desmond's isolation so helpful for us to understand the decline of the Hollywood star and what leads to her downfall? So I would pose that question and then you, Mary, being in the class and anyone else out there would pose an audio or video response. So it was a podcast, but for the classroom. I didn't yet know that that was going to be so helpful when I brought on guests who usually when I record a podcast, that's the first time I've ever met them. I've given some talking points, I've emailed with them, but I go into it cold now. And I always feel it's that first question. It's probably how you feel too, if you don't know someone that well. It's that, how do I do an icebreaker where I make sure that I set the tone of, you can trust me. This is going to be a comfortable experience. And for me, I do get people from the entertainment field. I had someone who was on The Real Housewives of New York, who was the first Black housewife, Ebony K. Williams, a lawyer. And she's so used to being on different news channels. So for me, it was, how can I make this an experience for her that doesn't feel scripted? That's not the same, 5 questions she's asked. So I started with, how's your press tour going? Where are you checking in right now emotionally? And I started with the emotional because I feel that instantly makes you know, okay, this isn't going to be, I got you. Listen, I hope you're all taking notes, by the way, because I know I am. And I already have 5 questions. I'm kind of this is going to be jumping around a little bit, but Andrew and I talk. And so you're basically in on the conversation. This is how we work. So, do you have your students now do podcasts? I mean, you were saying before you had sort of a quasi podcasty kind of thing going, but are you able to do that as assignments? I know not all programs are kind of open to these alternative things. In fact, I'm currently having conversations, we in the English department here, about can we give our students other ways to present information than the traditional research paper? What's so funny is I was talking to a student just 2 days ago saying, actually yesterday, saying, I'm running this class in the fall on the City and American Lit, and I want to try out this new tool. It's called ThingLink, and
let you create these VR kinds of experiences. And she was saying, oh, I'd rather just write the paper. I know how to write a paper. I'm like, that stunned me, because I had other students who have said, aren't there other ways we can, I'm so tired of writing papers. What else can we do? So, I'll get around this. I'll maybe give them options and so on. So I'm curious about, so we're not in that point yet. We have a student portfolio. They have to submit papers. I have department expectations for what's going to happen in one of my upper level electives. So I'm wondering if you have maybe some more latitude in other places where you've been able to do more interesting, creative assignments.
So that's a great question. And I guess I should say none of the opinions that I stayed are backed by a certain university, just to protect myself, right? So at Kane, where I'm teaching a world literature course, I actually am able to do a digital project. It's not something in the syllabus. It's something that I've brought to the table, but I allow them, basically they have to transform any thematic element of the text that we've read. So I'll give you an example. The Scottish play, or Macbeth. I'm not scared to say it. We're not in a theater. So I've had students who then they have to think about, how do I change that modality of the printed text, of the Shakespearean language, and how am I going to bring it into the modern age? So I've had students who've gone from everything with making cupcakes that have daggers and the castle and blood handprints with Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking scene and the blood on her hands, to I've had students do a skit in Target and they've acted out a scene in a new way, like using merchandise in Target. So some have drawn paintings. So that has been an interesting process. It's not a podcast, but I do think I'm working towards getting a system where I might be using more. I use my podcast background for those types of projects. I think the reason I haven't yet assigned a podcast is, as you know, it's just so technical. And I really have to have the space at the university that either is a studio or something that feels comfortable for the students, but also is a lesson for them in how podcasting works. And I also don't really know, like I would want to make it public. And that's a question I still have, is with the ethics of what do you do with college students' voices, and you put it out to the public. Well, on my TikTok, I have those in the public who are not always the kindest. I'm used to the feedback. I mean, it doesn't bother me because I know that if I put out an opinion, there's probably going to be different,
of course,
angles. But I don't want my students to have to be exposed to that. So it's kind of like just thinking, if I do a podcast, maybe it'll be a private YouTube, or maybe it's going to be something that I really have to make sure is bounded in the class. But I would love if my core English too, I've thought about that the final really does have a podcast element. Like I would love to bring my students in, maybe a round table around this podcast studio and talk about their reflection. So I have seen that some writing courses offer a virtual reflection at the end of the semester. And I do enjoy that, because I think that, like you said, some students, they just really want to get out of that writing mind. And at the end of the day, rhetoric is not just persuasive writing. It's persuasive speaking. It comes from ancient Greek philosophers. It's so interesting. Yesterday, we had our annual Shakespeare Day event here. And Donovan Sherman, who is our resident Shakespearean, in addition to Robin Keller, not to leave him out, but said, basically what you would hear in Shakespeare's day was, we're going to hear a play, not going to watch a play. And it was all about the words and hearing. So, but you're right. This is not to dissuade anyone who wants to do this, but so the reason I basically, this is the way I approach many of my experiments. I just kind of jumped in with both feet. So this past summer, I went to France with a colleague who was doing a study abroad trip. So I was her co-chaperone, and we were chatting. And normally the co-chaperone doesn't have any real faculty responsibility. I'm there to make sure all things go well and so on and help out. But she wanted to do
a special kind of project. She got permission from her department to be able to do an alternative to a regular paper. And she came up with the idea of a podcast. And thinking back to Andrew and my conversations, I kept thinking I really wanted to do one for CFG because in-person workshops, not even in person, even virtual ones, they've gotten hard. I'll often just be in a Teams meeting or a Teams event with, the people who are presenting and no attendees. And it suddenly hit me, well, why don't I just, and I record them anyway. So I went down that road, but she said, I'd love to do a podcast. I said, fine, I will take that on. I will do the research. I will figure out what we need to do and I will be their support person. And it was great, but I have to tell you, so you're right. Before the podcast, I generate my questions. I figure out what the angle is going to be, of course, beforehand, but I generate my questions. I generate a script. And then I always have my laptop in front of me. So this is one of the reasons this is also not on video is because Andrew, while we're talking, I'm jotting down some quick questions too. I don't have a pen in front of me. But, I want to mention this. I want to ask him about that. So it's a process. And then fortunately we have fabulous technical support here. Thank you, Mike, and others. But yeah, it's great. We have great facility, and they're wonderful to work with. Not everybody is so lucky, but certainly here at Seton Hall, we really do have a strong support system. We use Podbean, but they do also post them in other venues. Anyway, so yeah, it's not. It would be more. I've thought about the podcast thing for my students as well, but I don't. I think they just think it means recording you talking to someone, and that's not what you really have to plan for. What's at the very least, you need to have alternative questions and a direction you want to go in.
Well, I have assigned podcasts to my students.
Okay.
So I had the pleasure of interviewing Gregory Maguire, who wrote Wicked, which,
right.
now
so cool.
has such fanfare.
Exactly.
When it came out in 1995, when he published it, it wasn't as
right.
well known or popular, borrowing a song from the show. So I had my students, because we're analyzing Wicked, listen to our conversation and understand what do you get out of a podcast conversation that you don't get just seeing his name, reading a novel. What's that behind the curtain? And that's really what started me interviewing authors. I was assigning those authors in my Broadway musical course. And I thought, wait, why don't I have my students contribute questions? I'll read their names on the podcast. And there was such an investment. So that's really how the authors started on my podcast, was through a teaching tool. And now at Seton Hall, I've actually had my students look at the different genres of podcasts. Like, can we consider it a literary text? Is a podcast a text? Why or why not? And it's been interesting because I had them find 3 examples of podcasts that they would listen to. Like, is a news podcast a literary text? Is a sports podcast a literary text? A gossip one? And it really seems that it just depends on how we're defining text,
right,
and how we're defining that interpretation. So I do use podcasting, not with them creating, but as an analytic assignment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I've thought about having them create is a bigger take on than I think they would even realize. I mean, well, the students in my colleague's class they did them at the end. They had to find someone to interview. It was a one-shot deal. But no, I think they did a terrific job. I listened to them. They really did, but it's a lot of upfront, well, especially for something like that, for a class and so on. So I'm curious, I mean, the other thing maybe to consider, Andrew, is, we bring a lot of speakers, writers, and we have a wonderful speaker series here called Poetry in the Round. Might be worth connecting with. So right now, well, Nathan Oates is the outgoing director, and Courtney Sender, who is one of our newest faculty colleagues and a fiction writer, I think will be taking it on next year. But, there might be space to have a brief conversation with some of these authors that they bring here. They're not all poets. It's called Poetry in the Round, but they're not all poets by a long shot. So
no, I think that I was actually, when I left Stony Brook, after I graduated, I was actually thinking of, I'm starting to see what you've created is so exciting, because I have a mentor friend. She was my professor when I went to Kane for my undergrad. And she actually now is thinking of doing mini podcast episodes about how to teach world literature, or just how to teach literature in this digital age. And I feel that now podcasting is becoming such an academic conversation at universities. And I do think that if you're having such exciting authors or speakers, that why not just have them do like a 15-minute conversation as a podcast that gets released to the public? That now they know about, oh, Seton Hall brought so-and-so. Like, oh, I know someone who's about to apply to college. They're really into this kind of field of study. I would want them to go to Seton Hall. I mean, now we're talking kind of about the public relations aspect, but podcasting really is a marketing tool. But I think for the arts, I would always hear from academics, and I think the conversation has changed, but them say, I don't want to promote my work, or I am nervous to talk about the book that I just wrote. Publicity is boring to me. And I think that whether we like it or not, we're in an age of influence culture, and we're in an age of social media that it's about, okay, how do you make your authentic voice shine on these platforms, and don't let those platforms take over the conversation? Because, you know, there will be some voice that will break through and will be catchy. And usually they're the opinions that a lot of academics don't necessarily agree with, that are controversial. And they'll set the tone for, well, this is what college professors are doing. And a lot of these podcasters aren't college professors. It's like, maybe we should have those who are actually in the classroom delivering this message to the public. And that's why I do think it's so important that we have these conversations, because I never want the type of work that happens at college to go unnoticed, or to only be, you know, behind the walls. Like, it's important that you can go to YouTube and hear what college professors, their specialty or their thinking through of ideas, because that's what professors are trained in, is how to distill difficult information and explain it to their students.
Well, no, you're right. And I think many of us would agree that part of the attack on higher education that we've seen in the last years, especially right now, have come out of the fact that we have been, in fact, encased in the ivory tower. We have not been out there explaining what we do. We have let other people speak for us and explain what it is they think we do. That we're, you know, indoctrinating their children, that we're, you know, all uber lefties and so on. Many of us are, but by the same token, there are certainly many people who are conservative, and it is the same. We are a microcosm of the rest of society, which I think has gotten lost along the way. So you're right, getting us out there. So this leads me to another question, because I'm going to assume at least a good part of the people listening to this are probably fellow academics. And, you know, Andrew and I know, having come through these systems, that, you know, what academia likes is traditional stuff. They want the research paper. They want the essay published in the top journal. They want the book, the monograph, you know, the single authored book, ideally, that kind of thing. So I guess the question, of course, is, and people worry. I mean, honestly, you come up before a tenure and promotion committee, and are they going to value this work? So a question is it becoming more acceptable based on what you're seeing, and, you know, the people you're working with? I'm in a different position, right? I'm a senior tenured faculty, full professor. You're coming up as a younger, more junior colleague. So you're seeing what people are going through in a way that I might not be seeing anymore.
I think that there's definitely a lot of optimism, especially if you're out there right now and you're like me, where you might be working at multiple colleges. You're an adjunct, or you're, you know, going up for tenure, right? Which is heady, full of a lot of, I'm sure, tense feelings
Mm-hmm.
that, or maybe you're out there and you wanted to teach at college, but you've gone into a different industry. I think that when I saw one of my peers at Stony Brook deliver a dissertation that was a graphic novel, when I created a podcast, when I've seen different at MLA, these conversations of, okay, how is humanities? What do we do in this current moment?
Mm-hmm.
And these questions are always asked now. I think that, I don't know if it's about, is it being given merit? I maybe will reframe the question if I can, Mary, not to,
absolutely.
contest what you're saying.
Not at all.
But I think that it's more eventually a college administration or those who are in charge
Mm-hmm.
of hiring
Mm-hmm.
will not be able to ignore the importance of media.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more when they realize,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is not going away. And if anything, we're losing students because we don't offer internships in media relations,
Mm-hmm.
in publishing in 2025,
Right.
in these different aspects of most students not going to Seton Hall
Mm-hmm.
and then getting a PhD in English,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're probably either going to another grad program or they're going to they're going to go in the medical field, nursing. I have a lot of nursing students this semester.
Mm-hmm.
I think that then it's important of how are our professors on this campus engaging with those who aren't just in this community,
Mm-hmm.
but they're enriching or using their talents in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I do think it's happening. I mean, I see it happening with when I share, like I just taught A Rose for Emily, which, if you're out there and you've never read A Rose for Emily, is
Yes.
such an interesting,
You must read it.
yes, decay of the American Southern aristocratic family.
Yes.
And an indictment on, those who inherited their money from slavery.
Right.
And
Mhm.
just full of such condemnation
Yes.
of what happens to a spinster,
Mhm.
derogatory spinster woman. But all of that is to say, I am so excited with the conversations in class that then I went on TikTok and did like a 30-second, if you've never read A Rose for Emily, like I just had this great conversation with my students. And then I'll get comments on it like, oh, I love that story.
Right.
Or I'm going to add it to my list.
Mhm.
Or when I go to the library, I just got a novel called Song of Myself, published posthumously in 2024 by Arnie Kantrowitz.
Mhm.
And it's all about a mix of like a memoir / historical fiction. And he looks at how his protagonist is so inspired by Whitman's poetry that it helps with his coming out journey in the 1970s. And I talked about that on social media. And I think that what I find is when you talk about what you're gravitating towards,
Right.
what we're reading, what conferences you're going to connect to a certain audience who might not be able to now. Maybe it's they went to college and they didn't study the major that they were passionate about.
Mm.
How many times have we had STEM students in our class? And not
Right.
going against STEM.
Mhm.
I loved my organic chem class and, well, physics, that's a different story. But I loved my calculus and organic chem
Okay.
classes. And so many poets are actually science majors.
Mhm.
And I think it's because poetry is such a dissection, right? Like you have to really learn about the stanzas, the figurative language.
Right.
It's almost like a mathematical equation in a
that's
way.
true.
The rhyme scheme, right?
Mhm.
A, B, A, B,
Mhm.
C, D, C, D,
Right.
And I think that I get inspired because people will reach out and comment and I'll say to them, well, what did you think of that
Mhm.
book?
Right.
Like, it's exciting that there are people that you can influence with education. And I think like, it's not influencing with brands. It's not
right.
influencing just with, what to buy at Sephora
Right.
and what serum to get. It's influencing of knowledge is power.
Mm.
And I think right now, because of the threats on higher education, knowledge is power. And I always say to my students, how many of you have a public library card? Out of 20, maybe 2 have raised their hand. And I said, okay, this is not graded. Please get a library card.
Right.
Because you're entitled to a library card in your town.
Mm-hmm.
And libraries aren't just for checking out books.
Right.
They're for their computer resources, the study rooms, like the DVDs, the CDs, like the magazines you get for free. And I think that it's exciting to see how, in a way, I feel like we have to remind each other right now of just the beauty of the humanities. Like, sometimes it's okay if there isn't an end goal with just enjoying a book or listening to an audiobook. Sometimes just the pleasure of you learning, that's the pleasure.
Right.
That's the takeaway.
Right. That's true. That's true. No, that's great. So one more quick final question. Do you have a favorite podcast yourself? Aside from mine, of course. But
I love your podcast. I told Mary, I was listening to it on my way here. Oh, it's so interesting because it's kind of like if you asked me what's your favorite novel.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
No, but I love that question because I think it just depends what mood I'm in, because podcasts really do have an intimacy to them.
Okay.
Like, I do feel to become a good podcaster, it's like being a writer.
Okay.
You need to listen to a variety of podcasts. So I would say for me, though, if I had to choose one, well, there's a podcast right now that I absolutely am just binge listening to. So I'll go with that one.
Okay.
Which is Movies That Made Me Gay.
Oh,
I love this
funny.
podcast.
Okay.
And it's all about, they choose like an iconic film and how it has a campy or cult-like atmosphere. So one episode I just listened to is Scream 3. My fiance and I, we love Scream.
Okay.
I mean, he's probably a little more into Scream than I am, but we love horror films.
Okay.
And they like look at Scream 3 is, do you know the Scream films?
I do know them. I've never seen them.
Okay.
I can't watch scary things.
Okay. So Scream 3 is a meta one where it's all about the cast of Stab putting on their film production based on the actual like original murder that happens in the Scream franchise. So they're all putting on a film, but then Ghostface, the killer, comes to the Hollywood set. So it's like so interesting, so meta. Parker Posey's in it. And, you know, she was just in The White Lotus. So there's such an enjoyment out of listening to their podcast because it's like fan culture. So I really like fan culture podcasts, but I listen to the NPR daily podcast. You know, I would say I have my checklist of, I want to listen to this every day. And then I have my, do I want to just multitask? What's something that's going to put a smile on my face?
That's good. Yeah, right.
Because I can now only listen to like maybe 10 minutes of politics.
Right.
And then I'm done. And I want to kind of just go into another one is Broadway Nation with my friend David Armstrong. He like looks into the history of every decade of Broadway musicals. So like those kinds of podcasts, you know, I'll even listen to Real Housewives recap podcasts because it's, I don't want to say mindless because it's not.
No.
There's an analogy, but you know, it's something that can just get you in the groove of where, even if it's, I'm going for a walk on a sunny day.
Right.
It's something to just enjoy whatever they're dissecting.
Exactly. Yes. No, I feel the same way. I mean, so I watch Golden Girls episodes over and over. I don't even watch them. They're just sort of in the background. But and so I was just reading something recently about why people actually like watching the same thing over and over again, because it's you don't have to spend a lot of brain power on it. You know it's coming. You can actually even sort of be attuned to your favorite moments and pay attention to those and then move away from them. So anyway.
Yeah, for me, that's Miss Congeniality.
Love Miss Congeniality. That's I mean, I can even live with the second one.
Yes,
it's not as
the
good.
Vegas one.
Yeah, the Vegas one is obviously isn't as good, but it has its moments. So we could just go on forever. So I have to have Andrew back at some point. But I do hope that if you're thinking about, contact me. If you're here at Seton Hall, if you would like to be a guest on this podcast, I'm happy to promote your work, your research, your interests. I hope those of you listening have enjoyed this conversation. Be sure to check out the CFD website. You're going to find links to the podcasts, and the CFD blog, where I post all kinds of coming events. You can subscribe to Faculty Matters at www.shu.edu/faculty-development/podcast.html. If you have suggestions for topics, please reach out to me at mary.balkun@shu.edu. I want to thank Andrew for being here with me this afternoon. And at this really terribly busy time of year, the time just flew. And as we say here at Seton Hall, go Pirates.